Folks, we're going to finish off the afternoon. I'm going to tell you about a farm that a number of us got involved with a few years ago. We're going to be asking you how you would manage the problem. We've also decided to incorporate incentives to this particular component. Paula went shopping for chocolate Easter eggs the other day, and I'm reliably informed for either every attempt at an answer, it doesn't even have to be correct.
That's right, you just have to volunteer information.
Or any question whatsoever, you will definitely get one Easter egg. I think until you have a maximum of 10.
Well, there's no limit.
And this is true, everything that happened on this farm. So please, if we go along, if you've got any questions, well, ask a question, you get chocolate at that point. Hopefully it relates to this particular farm.
It does have to relate to the case.
So this is a farm, this was a few years ago that Paula and I were asked to visit in August. I should give you some history. 2 years prior to this date, this producer decided to start farming organically, which according to the organic standards at that time, banned the use of anthelmintics. That's a bit of history that will be relevant as we go along. August the 16th, I got a phone call because at the bottom of my building there's a postmortem room. And on August the 16th, the farmer from this place, he dropped off a dead lamb at the Animal Health Laboratory for a postmortem. He was asked, how many animals do you have on your farm? This isn't a particularly large farm. He had 12 ewes and 14 lambs. All right? He just lost this one, this lamb that he dropped off. Earlier in the month, 1 ewe and 1 lamb had died and were buried. Didn't know anything about why those animals had died. That was the beginning of August. Earlier in the year, in May, 2 ewes became dull, lethargic, anemic, and they died. No postmortems had been carried out. So, that same day, the pathologist opened the animal up. So it was a 4-month-old intact ram lamb. What did they find? This is directly from the postmortem report. There's a few errors in this, but I'm giving you exactly as it happened. So, what did it say? Firstly, they always look at the outside appearance. What did the animal look like? It said the oral mucous membrane, so that's inside the mouth. They all looked pale. What did that suggest? Anemia.
400 eggs.
That deserves a chocolate egg. It's to encourage people to participate. I'm not sure what the question it was the answer to, but anyway. What else did the pathologist say? It said body condition. Hydration is normal. Fat stores and muscle mass are moderately decreased. This suggested this animal didn't die suddenly, but it had died fairly quickly. Right, so it got sick and died over a few days, but not any quicker than that. Internal findings. So this is what they found inside. They said the carcass is diffusely pale, consistent with the anemia that they'd already noticed. I don't know anything about the egg counts at this point. We'll have to see if you were right. The abomasal contents, that's where all the nasty parasites live, they were dark red, and there are numerous, it says thousands, of 1 to 2 centimetre strongyle type parasites within. The word strongyle we use for horses. This was a sheep, but we'll ignore that. Sometimes these pathologists are a bit loose in the words they use. All right? This isn't very helpful, because he actually hasn't told us what the parasite was. He says 1 to 2 centimetres long. For those of you that looked at the parasites over here, what's the only one in the abomasum that's that big? Hemoncus, actually.
Which one doesn't you answer?
Okay, please put your hands up.
Was that you?
So, I'm suspicious that they're talking about Hemoncus. And then it also says there are also smaller 5 to 7 millimetre strongyle type parasites. Again, the pathologist is wrong, but anyway, all right. Present in fewer numbers, hundreds. I don't know what those are. Any guess what they might be? Ostatagia. There's 2 correct answers down here. Or Trichostrongylis.
I don't know how to say
event.
I think it's probably ostatager or teladossager, although pathologists could be a bit more helpful. What do we pay them for? They did provide a picture of the bigger parasites in the end. This, can you notice the barber pole appearance? Yeah. So almost certainly that's, well, I said yes and he said no, so I think he gets a chocolate egg. You get a chocolate egg for sarcasm. So they phoned up to my office and said that's what we found. And I said, I think we need parasite numbers to get more definitive information. So they went back, they hadn't thrown anything out, and they started counting things. What did they find? They found there's a total of 8,500 worms, 7,240 were Haemoncus, 1,320 was teladossager. Which of those two is the problem? What was the number? I think if everyone was truthful, that was about 90% responded. We're going to be out of chocolate very quickly. What did we say is the threshold above which you become very concerned about Haemoncus? Yeah, oh, Paula? 1,500. I think she's giving up. So the Haemoncus number is way above the safety level. Is everyone in agreement with that? Excellent. If you'd like to know...
Andrew, stop asking questions.
You can work out how much blood did this animal use, because every Haemoncus causes 50 microliters of blood loss a day. I can tell you, just multiplying that by that, this animal was losing 1/3 of a litre of blood every day. I mean, and I've seen much higher numbers than this, so it's not surprising sometimes these animals can die quickly. 2 of you have told me in the lunch break, break this afternoon, they've seen quicker mortalities than yes. The question?
We basically don't want 0 parasites, but if you wanted 0, that's the one to have. It's a barter pole. I mean, if you could eliminate anyone, that is the major kill.
So if there's any parasite that will kill, and kill quickly, it's Haemoncus. The other parasites will kill, but much more slowly.
They give you a lot more time to do something.
Right, you've got time to play. There's 2 eggs there, Paula. She's getting stingy with handing out the eggs. So you're absolutely right. Things get out of control with Haemoncus much more quickly than any other parasite. And a number of you have told me they've had exactly that experience. Things have changed in July, August very quickly. Another question?
No, it was a response.
Or response?
That amount of blood loss is equivalent to 1 unit of packed cells for a human, like 1 transfusion.
That's equivalent to 1 transfusion.
Yes.
Right. It's a sizable percentage. That looked reluctant, but it deserves it.
I want to make sure I have one.
We're worried we're not going to have any by the end. No, you're right. It's a sizable proportion of blood volume for this particular animal. What about the fecal sample? Was this lady right? I said, have a look at the fecal and tell me what the gin egg count was. There are 6 different eggs in this fecal sample. If you'd just taken a fecal from this animal, if it was still living, would you have known what the primary problem was? There's the gin egg count, 4,150. Is that consistent with a Haemoncus problem? Yes. I've seen 10, 15. All right, it's a large number. What did we do next? We were asked to go out to that farm actually almost the next day. And I want to take you to the farm and ask you a few practical questions. So this farmer's lost a lamb mid-August, acute sudden Haemoncus problem. So we drove out, so this is where we arrived, and I'm going to take you right to the back of this barn, which is on the pasture on which these animals are grazing. In the back of this barn is where these animals live. So this is where they're housed. This is the pasture they've been maintained the entire grazing season. I think this lady gets another egg for an expletive that just came out.
Gee, she's getting them all.
Well, yeah,
Come on.
So here are the animals grazing that pasture. Does it look an ideal summer for Haemoncus from the colour of the grass? Yeah, it's still green. It's not a summer where the grass dried out and you'd expect parasite numbers to die out. This is an area of about 1/3 of an acre. This is just looking around the back of the barn, and it's connected to another 1.5 acres. So but they've effectively been on that entire pasture the entire grazing season. So that's just looking around where they've been kept. What would you do next? Because there we are. We're standing on this, looking at this pasture. Producer says, what should I do? What would you do next if this was you?
Sell the sheep.
Well, hang on, I don't think you get eggs. Everyone said get out of sheep production. We can't give people chocolate eggs for that answer.
I think that if you hadn't treated them, you wouldn't have to worry about it.
So one question at the front was, treat them all and then you wouldn't have to worry about it.
No, don't treat them and you won't have to worry about it.
Oh, so she...
Am I supposed to
For
give
those
her
of
an
you that
egg
didn't
again?
hear, she said don't treat them, you therefore won't have a problem for much longer. Yes. Sorry?
Feedlot with just a few animals.
Put the whole lot indoors, is that what you said? That's one suggestion.
I mean, to save the animals, you gotta treat them.
So this lady at the front says, there's a chocolate egg. To save the animals, you've got to treat them. Any other suggestions?
Tell your answer. She's got a good one.
Use your Fibonacci
Yes.
scoring.
What's that?
Use your Fibonacci scoring.
Use your Fibonacci scoring. That's what I was looking for.
Two eggs?
Two eggs for that. What? We wanted first to just
Here's
ask...
another one, here's another one.
So we wanted to go out, we wanted first to look quickly, because it's easy to do with this number of animals. I realised the person who was talking to me was 1,500 animals. This is not what you probably would do at this point. But we went and looked at them. We did the wrong thing. Dr. Menzies, if we were doing the Fibonacci, should we have been looking at the mouth?
Do I get an egg if I answer?
So
Somebody else?
what did Paula say you should be looking at if you're doing the Fibonacci? Right, well you can ignore that for the next minute or so. Does this animal look anemic? Yes. Thank you. However, if you looked at the eye as well, can you see? Very white. Almost every animal we looked at was either anemic or incredibly anemic. Excellent suggestion at the front. Anything else you could do practically next?
Deworm them all.
So a number of you have said deworm them all. Before we get to that subject, why is that a problem on this farm? It's organic. So think about that for a second. What we did want to do was do fecals. We had vet students, and I realised you probably wouldn't wait for this in this situation, but it was just to try and confirm the Haemonchus issue, because we'd expect to see large numbers of gin-type eggs.
Andrew, you
Yes.
have a question here.
Oh, what's the question? Does the eye test work post-mortem? Not particularly well, no. I mean, the reality is you saw the pathologist made a comment about whether or not they thought it was anemic, but it becomes more unreliable. But the pathologist will state whether or not they think the animal is significantly anemic. In this situation, the animals were so anemic, even if they died, I think you would have noticed it. All right? Did you get a chocolate egg? So, we then went and collected fecal samples from 10 of the lambs. What can you tell me about the gin egg counts?
One doesn't need to be treated.
What's that? So there's one happy animal, number 5. Must be the genetically resistant one in this group. But the rest of the littermates, not happy. Are the counts low, high, or very high? They're extremely high, all right? Highest count, I think, is this one in the middle, 7,300. How about, what's the normal below which you wouldn't be concerned? About 500. All of these animals, except that one, number 5, have very high counts. If you'd pulled these samples to save money, the average count, 3,400. Would that have told you there was a problem? Yes. So even doing a fecal would have been helpful. So everyone's, almost except number 5, has got parasite problems. They've got massive numbers of parasites. They're all very sick. If we do nothing, we're going to lose most of these animals within the next few days. Who said they wanted to treat? We said that to the producer. The response was, you can't. I will lose my organic status. What would you say in response?
Organic status requires you to treat animals if they're in danger of dying.
Excellent. That wasn't the case of when we visited this farm. When the organic standards first came in, they didn't recognize this issue. It was a ludicrous situation to be in. Now you are allowed to treat individuals if they're sick to a limited extent. Back then you couldn't. They were going to lose their organic status. So today the organic standards are much more sensible and realistic. He was going to lose his organic status. What would you say to that? What would you rather have? No animals? Because if you do nothing, you have to treat these animals to keep them alive. Someone said send them to slaughter, alright? I mean, I suppose that's another option. We're not supposed to be sending sick animals to slaughter. They probably would not allow them into the food chain. Paula, do you want to comment on that?
Again, on the truck, I think, with those kind of things.
So they wouldn't even make it to the slaughterhouse, so that's not even an option. Yes?
I guess if he really doesn't want to lose the certification on his land, he can just sell the sheep to someone who can market.
That's a good.
But again, if you've got to transport them, I think Paul is concerned with that parasite bird, they may not even make the trip. You're okay, I didn't realize you were living down the road. I'll phone you the next time I get into this situation. I mean, the reality, sorry, it was another question. The reality was we had to treat. The organic status had to go out the window. All right. Are there any other things you would like to do at this point? Someone said treat. Did you have a suggestion? Give them
New cells or new cells, vitamins.
Oh, vitamins. Sorry, that's the accent. I'm not sure at this point with this burden being so bad it would have much of an impact. All right? Someone at the back had a question, suggestion.
You've got to give them something more to eat.
You've got to give them something more to eat. What can you tell me about the pasture these animals are on? What do you know about the level of contamination of Haemonchus on that pasture? It's massive. Where are these animals today? Well, they're still standing on the pasture. What's something you would like to do with these animals in addition to treating them? Because if you treat today, how soon after treating them and you leave them on that pasture, they're going to get reinfected? Well, they're going to get infected tomorrow, and they're going to be dying with adult parasites a few weeks later. Any thoughts then, what else you'd like to do other than treating them? Move them. Where?
Clean pasture.
Clean pasture. Literally the response was, I don't have any. So, we were told there is no other pasture you can move them to. Someone said, did someone say inside? We were told that's too expensive.
Sell the farm.
Call the SPCA.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. So, what happened? So you've given me all the sensible options. The thing is, you know at this point that pasture is heavily contaminated. You have to treat the animals, you have to get them off. We couldn't move them off the pasture. He wouldn't allow us to put them indoors. So he was forcing us to keep them on that pasture. So we went out, we treated the whole lot with ivermectin. That was the first thing we did. We had to within 24 hours. All right? There's a picture of us deworming all the sheep. What would you like to know about the treatment? Was it successful or not? Back then, we didn't think we had anthelmintic resistance. We didn't think about it much. Now, you always have to ask yourself, did the treatment work? All right? How would you prove that the treatment worked?
Test in 2 weeks.
Test in 2 weeks. There's another Easter egg here. I think you've had your full quota.
Okay, we'll give him to another guy.
Here are the fecal egg counts 2 weeks later. This is before treatment, that's after treatment. Did the treatment work? Yes. Is there anthelmintic resistance?
No.
No. Is that good or bad for these sheep?
Awesome.
Brilliant. Because you've got a treatment you know that works. We were forced to keep the animals on that pasture to the end of the grazing season. Our opinion was that was a semi-suicidal approach, but we were forced into it. You've come up with all the sensible suggestions to get them off the pasture. We weren't allowed to do that. We had to live with the problem, and we had to retreat every 3 to 4 weeks for the rest of the grazing season.
How expensive was that?
Well, how expensive? Another good question. How expensive was that? And to be honest, was it more expensive than putting them indoors? This didn't become a very sensible discussion. What advice? And please keep this polite. What advice would you give the farmer for the next grazing season?
Don't call me again.
Well, the first thing is, you know that pasture is heavily contaminated this grazing season. We were told today that Haemonchus doesn't overwinter well in Canada. Do you think there might be someone here? All right. Last question. What do you think was the likely cause of death of the 2 ewes that died in May of that year? Do you remember I said right at the beginning of that year, around lambing, they had lost 2 ewes from anemia, dullness, lethargy. Does that sound like Haemonchus? Yes. Why do you think the ewes died in May? Stress.
They weren't dewormed.
They hadn't been dewormed for at least a year and a half. Almost certainly the previous grazing season, they'd ingested enough. In the grazing season, it went dormant, and then when they lambed, these parasites resumed development, and that's what caused the death in the ewes. What did this producer do? Following grazing season, decided to go organic again. That grazing season, they lost 16 out of 18 lambs. They have never kept sheep ever since.
Good.
I think many of you, there's some fairly no-brainers in that example, but it does bring together a lot of the issues managing parasites, and particularly how not to manage Haemonchus.
Isn't that considered sort of an animal abuse?
So the question at the front, isn't that considered animal abuse? To be honest, that was why many of us lobbied the organic industry to change the standards. And to change the standards as they are now, that you are now allowed to treat animals that are sick or have high egg counts. You're not allowed to treat preventatively, as those of us with non-organic farms are allowed to do, but you're allowed to treat individual animals if they're sick. And it's welfare that drove that discussion. Literally welfare issues. Because animals are dying because the standard stopped people from deworming. So that was a good move in the end. Can I take this one first? Yes.
If he wants to stay organic, he'd be better to go to confinement.
If he wants to stay organic, he'd be better placed to go indoors.
They don't allow that.
Well, my understanding of the organic standards, they require outdoor access.
Yes.
Oh, you get an Easter egg though, even so. That's great. There's a question at the back.
I find it really curious. I'm not organic on our farm, but 70 years ago, if we had this meeting, pretty sure everybody in here would be, and there was 10 times as many sheep in North America, and nobody ever heard of like the workers we have today. And sheep worldwide. Just do the numbers. So what are we doing different? Is it something we're doing to our soil? I've often questioned that. Like there was more sheep in the southern part of Ontario probably back then than there is in all of Canada. And the same in the U.S. And no one ever heard of Ivermectin or Valvazine.
Imports.
So there has to be something we're doing wrong. Is it just poor stockmanship? What is it?
Paul, I have to opt out because I only came to Canada 15 years ago. I'm not old enough.
I am old enough to remember pre-Ivermectin days. And my memory is that we had lots of parasite problems back then. And the treatments, if you want to go back before fenbendazole, and even if you went back before levantazole, we had other treatments, and they just weren't effective. And there was a lot of losses. What may be different, and we don't know, and we're hoping we have a project, or we have a proposal in to look at a bunch of different things around Haemonchus. One of them is we think, but we don't know, that maybe Haemonchus, which is a tropical parasite, is getting cold adapted. And so it's becoming more virulent in that regard. It's more able to, like we always say, it has to be 25 degrees before it develops to L3. That's based on research that's done in warmer countries. we want to repeat that work here to see whether that's true, because it may change our understanding.
Certainly in the country I come from, the UK, Haemonchus has moved northwards dramatically just over the last 5-10 years in association with climate change issues. And so I think Paul is suggesting that could be responsible for a change in Haemonchus's importance.
That's the one parasite. But
Yeah,
you said there had to be other ones?
Well, Talatosasia, trichostrongyles are the other one. And as we alluded to, yes, you can see severe losses, but it seems to be a lot easier to manage those because we have, in our short summer, at least traditionally short summer, we don't get a lot of generation, so the pasture loads don't build up as much. Individual farmers can run into big problems, but it's a lot easier to manage them with pasture rotation and to manage a contaminated pasture. The issue with Haemonchus is you can go from a clean pasture to a very heavily contaminated pasture in a very short period of time. Takes a lot longer with the other ones. So maybe, and I mean, obviously I didn't know as much back then as I know now, but my sense is that we had parasite problems 30 years ago before I was
I'm
there.
not talking 30, I'm talking 70 years. 100.
I wasn't alive then.
No, me. But
Funnily enough, on that subject, someone at the last meeting was talking about feeding nicotine and tobacco leaves to sheep. So there were other things being used. They weren't as good for the sheep those days.
To what degree does mixed farming have in that process?
Good point.
You know,
Other guys had cattle.
well, sure, and you have crops and you
And that
have...
farm had cattle, but they didn't have fences good enough for the sheep, so they would not rotate with the cattle,
Yeah.
which would have saved them as well. So that's a very good point, and you get 2 eggs for
You're going to have to work hard for 2 eggs now. The gentleman at the back in green.
I was going to make just the same suggestion. They want one of my eggs.
All right.
30 years ago, it was mixed farming, and they would grow a little bit of grain and some cattle and some pigs and some chickens, and they were an ounce. So they don't have to concentrated, 1,500 sheep on one farm, which we didn't have.
Right, and if any of you have been to countries like New Zealand, Australia, and I know Paula thought she was landing in heaven the first time she went to New Zealand. She came out disguised at 7 in the morning, and as far as she could see, there were sheep everywhere. I mean, the stocking densities, I couldn't believe it. And they're deworming, they have to deworm 10 to 12 times a year in some areas, because stocking densities is just driving parasite burden. So you're right, so the increase in farm sizes is having an impact, certainly. Yeah.
In New Zealand, they never cranked up their sheep numbers till they got drenched.
Right.
And when they got drenched, like, in the 60s and 70s, then they really cranked their numbers up. And then, to go back to Jim's point, everybody used to have 30 or 40 sheep in Ontario 50 years ago. 2 things happened. The coyotes came along. But then if you listen to the old-timers, a lot of them will tell you that their land got sheep sick, we called it, which meant they had a worm burden, and they were just going thin and dying on it.
Right. Gentleman there, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I come from the Edmonton area.
Hang on, they're fighting over chocolates on the back road. Sorry, I'll make sure you get one. Yeah.
I come from the Edmonton area, and I haven't seen it in the -40 range since the early 70s.
Right.
Temperature-wise.
Right. It's still astounding that our parasites can, like Talatosagia, survives pretty well, even in Ontario. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any promising classes of antiemetic drugs on the horizon?
So are there any promising antiemetics on the horizon? The answer is yes. This one that Jocelyn mentioned that's sold under the name Orbix, that's certainly available in New Zealand, in Australia and the UK. I was told it's being licensed, I thought, in the US, but I was told by the company that makes it they weren't going to license it in Canada. They don't see a big enough market. Paula.
But the Canadian Sheep Federation has a working group on drugs. I don't know if anybody here is on the committee or not, but the Orbix is on the list. So it doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but we're going to lobby Novartis, the company, for it. Do you want to mention our project?
Well, we're also hoping to get funding to work on an old drug called closantel. It's never been used in North America, but it works extremely well against drug-resistant Haemonchus. So we put in a proposal, We'll see. It's an old one. It's never been licensed in North America. We've asked for permission to do some initial studies with it to address this very issue. It will work against ivermectin and safeguard resistant Haemoncus. So keep your fingers crossed.
If it's misused, we'll get resistance really quickly. But we're hoping to introduce it and use it in a manner that we described today, where we do targeted selective treatment of ewes at lambing, and hopefully we can eliminate the Haemoncus problem on some of these farms, but not create resistance. That's our goal if we get the funding. And OSMA has committed to helping support us. We need to get money from the government, and we're just waiting to hear.
Okay, and one last question. It guarantees 2 eggs.
No. There's a product that I saw that is available in Australia, and it's not a drug, but it is a Haemoncus test for, it's looking for occult blood in the fecal samples.
Yes, and I didn't include that this morning, but like some of us.
Sorry, can I just mention that people won't have heard all this? After
sorry.
sitting at the back, there's a test in Australia that looks for blood in the feces of sheep and uses that as a diagnostic test for Haemoncus.
Yeah. So those of us that know our physicians get us to do a test for colon cancer by testing for blood in our stool. You can do the same thing with sheep.
It's a different test. I'd love to see you. Or do I get all that? I'd love to see you explain that to your physician. It actually wasn't me, it was my sheep.
What do you mean he's going to die?
Those of you that may have a dairy cattle background, sometimes you do that to see whether they have ulcers in their stomach, where they bleed, and it's the same idea. That all you do, and so it's not a fancy technology. We have lots of these little test strips out there. It's just doing them and interpreting them. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. But try it out. Let me know what happens. I don't know anyone. No, the human one is. I just don't know what would happen if you tried a sheep on it. Don't. I'll get into trouble. I think do we need to stop? Can I take one more?
You guys can go as long as they want to stay.
Yeah. Another question.
Other countries are doing more research on genetic selection. How promising is that?
There's a lot of work on genetic selection in Australia and New Zealand. You can even buy ram semen that's been progeny tested. And I do know people in Ontario that have been buying ram semen from New Zealand with high heritability for resistance. I mean, it will change resistance status slowly over multiple generations. So there are certain parts of the world. Paula?
Effective. The thing, I guess, the point I was making in the presentation is, for you to select resistant animals on your property is very time-consuming and expensive. The New Zealanders are doing it with large numbers of animals and lots of money. And so you can purchase the resistant semen, as you said, and that's what some producers have been doing. I don't know how many lambs are on the ground. Maybe some other people here know about it. But you can, pardon?
Close to a year old.
They're a year old. But as I was saying before, on your farm, you don't need any special technology to select for resistance by getting rid of the susceptible, as I said before. All you need is records and IDs.
Excellent. Any other questions? Anybody else want any more chocolate? Folks, thanks very much for all your contributions to that. I hope to help.
Yeah, you have to pay your
Hang on, folks.